And I'm Nate Pfluger, Precision Ag Coordinator for Pheasants Forever and an avid outdoorsman with friends and family in my free time. Together, we'll work to bring you perspectives from both landowners and conservation professionals for discussions on soil, water, and wildlife in ag-dominated landscapes. Welcome back to the Wild Ag Podcast. My name is Nate Pfluger, and today I'm joined by Dr. Andy Little, my co-host, and we actually are lucky enough to have Dr. Ray Ward on. And the reason we wanted to bring Dr. Ward on is obviously he has a wealth of knowledge in soils and crop production, but he's also traveled across the U.S. And around the world dealing with soils and crop production. And one of the first times I was introduced to Dr. Ward was on the No-Till on the Plains bus tour when we went up to South Dakota and North Dakota. And Dr. Ward was speaking on one of the longer jaunts of the bus tour. And we came across, I don't even remember where we were, but we were driving on a road, and to the right, it was canyons and cliffs. And then right to the left of us, not even a mile away, was crop production. And the grower was saying that it was really good crop ground. And it was really interesting to hear Dr. Ward explain just what happened geologically to where we could have crop production half a mile away from canyons and stuff that was completely unfarmable. So that was really the inspiration for why I wanted to bring Dr. Ward on. So that's enough of my rambling. Dr. Ward, would you please introduce yourself?
Well, and I guess I'm Ray Ward, and I was born in Jefferson County, and we moved to Saline County when I was in the 7th grade. So I kind of call Western. My hometown is there because that's where I graduated in high school, at Western High School in those days. And then I got a scholarship to go to February Junior College and went down there and took the ag classes that they had. And I really felt like I should get a degree in soil conservation. And I got my 2 years in at February and went to University of Nebraska and got my BS degree in soil conservation. And was going to go work for Soil Conservation Service. And I have a little physical problem. The guy said, "We can't hire you. You're colorblind." And I had no idea what to do, so I went back and talked to my advisor, who was R.A. Olson, for my undergraduate degree. And I said, "I don't know what to do." And he said, "I got an assistantship. You can start Monday." And so I got signed up for classes and worked in a lab in Keim Hall for 2 years, getting my master's degree. And then when I was writing my thesis, R.A. come in and said, "Paul Carson in South Dakota State's looking for someone to run a soil testing lab." And so I went up and interviewed for it and got the job. And so we moved to Brookings. And then after a while, I decided I needed to really get a PhD. So I did all the coursework and completed that in 1972. And then the Dean of Agriculture there, Dwayne Ocker, hired me to go to Redfield to start a research and extension center. Redfield is they're going to bring water from Oahe, at Pierre, to Redfield to irrigate about 200,000 acres. And then some people started fighting that. And 2.5 years later, Dr. Matlock from Oklahoma State called and wanted to know if I was interested in a soil testing job. And so I went and interviewed and got the job. So I moved to Stillwater, running the soil and water testing laboratories, and was the extension soil specialist for the state of Oklahoma. And then I decided that the commercial laboratory at that time was, main one was Harris Laboratories, and their fertilizer recommendations are horrible. So I told my boss if I got a chance, I was going to run a commercial laboratory. And then I got the chance at Dodge City, started the Servitech lab, and learn how to do business. And after we started making money, then my wife and I decided maybe we couldn't do that on our own. And so we moved to Kearney through a couple of guys, Mark Kottmeyer, a crop consultant, and Jerry Schmidt at Monarch Industries. And they convinced us that Kearney was a place to settle. And that's when the Ward Laboratories started in 83. We were in a 3-bay garage in the fall of 83, and then we got into a lab in 84, 3,500 square feet. In 5 years, we built a lab for 6,000 square feet ourselves. Moved in there, and then we added on to that in 2000 to another 9,200 square feet. In 2015, we added on another 17,000 square feet.
Wow.
In 2021, added on another 4,000. So now we got 36,000 square feet of space and about 60 full-time employees. And
Wow.
right now we've hired about 30 people for the busy fall.
Wow.
So it's growing beyond anything I ever expected.
Yeah.
But that's kind of my story.
And all because you were colorblind. Thank the Lord.
That's right. I missed that part to tell them about that. But some physical things it was a blessing, really.
That's incredible. That's an incredible story. Just, being able to take and go from, those degrees and kind of your interest there, and then eventually translating that into what you have today and the infrastructure. And like you said, I'm sure, like a lot of folks that are entrepreneurs that are thinking about their role in those companies, it's like, I never envisioned I would see the growth and see how many people I'm employing today. So that's really impressive.
And my take on the whole business was, I get excited about helping farmers and ranchers with their input costs and all those things. And I said, I got to make enough money to survive, but making money wasn't part of the business. It was helping farmers and ranchers.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and when listening to you introduce yourself and all of your experiences, it's obvious that you have experiences all the way from Oklahoma all the way up through South Dakota and into the Dakotas across the Great Plains. And that's really one of the reasons that I wanted to bring you on. To really, today, when folks talk about the Great Plains, obviously a lot of it's row crop production. In good rainfall environments. But I don't think folks, including myself, think about what it took to get us to these productive soils. Like, it wasn't 100 years, it wasn't 1,000 years, but it was millions of years that has really set the stage for us at this point in time. Would you say that's correct?
Well, that's correct. And geologic time is way different what we normally think about in time. But
in your opinion, how long has it taken us to get to this point where we have the productive soils that we do?
Well, the kind of the last glacial period, I think, ended about 25,000 years ago. And I don't know if any of that glacier was in Nebraska or not, but in South Dakota, or at Redfield, South Dakota, the Dakota Lakes, there was a Dakota Lake, is from Redfield, Aberdeen, about 40 miles, is a big glacial lake, and it drained 5,000 years ago. So those soils formed in 5,000 years. And so I think that a lot of our soils in the Nebraska thing are formed in the last, 25 to 50 years.
That's interesting.
So do you think there are specific large-scale events that formed the soils of the Great Plains as a whole, or have they just been slow, steady processes over millions of years?
The parent material is, I see this in Kearney all the time because we're mining what they call yellow clay. It's actually silts, but then they put that down for base to put concrete floors on and stuff. And those cuts are about 15 feet deep, and it's all the same color. There's no layers of organic matter or anything. So I'm trying to imagine what kind of windstorms would be that would deposit that much silt. And the silt is, it's called loess, Loess. And where did all that loess? And now there's a bulletin from the college School of Natural Resources. A guy wrote on the sources of loess. And a lot of the loess come from the glaciers, of course, as they melted and had all this bare soil and the winds blowing. And then the sandhills were active dunes, and all the silt sorted out of there. And then the other source was the Badlands of South Dakota, which I think is kind of amazing. But again, in the Kearney area, sometimes you see subsoil or the parent material that's pretty white in comparison to the more yellow type color.
Can you briefly explain parent material a little more for those who are not familiar with that term?
Well, I guess the soil is no different than you. You're raised by a parent, and the soil comes from the parent. When we're trying to evaluate the productivity of soils, the first thing you look at is parent material. That's what the soil is formed on. And so in a lot of Nebraska, the reason Nebraska soils are so good is because the wind deposit silts is our main parent material. Now, in the river valleys and creek valleys, you have alluvial parent material, which is deposited by water, and a lot of that's covered with some silts. But if you dig down, you can see layered stuff in there, and then you got the glacial till kind of soils, and of course you got the sand hills, and then up in Chadron area you got residual soils that are pretty high in clay, kind of thing, and so there's all kinds of parent materials, and some parent materials are great, especially a lot of the bottomland soils, and then the really good soils like the Holdridge Silt loam, the state soil, and then you got some really bad ones like the one I got to dig in one time it's a good productive soil, but it's Pawnee compared to Wymore, and Wymore is a less parent material, and the Pawnee is glacial till parent material, and the glacial till is really high clay, and so it's really a tough soil compared to those numbers, and so it's just interesting to look at all those kind of things. And
so the basis of parent material, it's rocks, correct, that are broken down that create our soils?
Yeah, if you're on a residual soil, it'd be the bedrock that's broken down, and a lot of times those soils are more shallow and that kind of thing. Now you hear, as experiences, at one time when I was at South Dakota State, we were meeting in Sioux City every year, South Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa, and Nebraska, and the chairman of the soils department at Iowa State said, we can lose 100 tons of soil, put on 100 pounds of nitrogen, and grow 100 bushel corn. And it was kind of a bad omen at that time, but there was, because we accepted erosion at that time, but we could afford to lose that topsoil because it was deep soil. In Brazil, I've been to Brazil, and there it's the parent material or the bedrock is basalt, and the parent material is above that, but it's about 3 feet. And when they lose that soil, they're at bedrock. They have nothing.
Wow!
And it's going to take thousands of years for that soil to reform. And so they're really the ones that started the no-till farming. They got more than it was here. We had pioneers but it was actually the Brazilians that taught us some things on no-till.
Wow.
That's really incredible.
And they had to, though, because like you said, if they lost their 3 feet of topsoil, you can't grow any crops.
So then, talking about erosion, and that's my concern on things, but NRCS allows you to lose 5 tons per acre per year and still be in the farm program. In 30 years, that's an inch of topsoil. And in 300 years, that's 10 inches of topsoil. And then when the scientists ask about how long does it take for an inch of topsoil to form, normally the answer is 500 years. So that's why I'm so adamant about the no-till farming and stopping erosion as much as possible, because it's a real concern from a stewardship standpoint of the land. And
yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I'm thinking of a producer I met, this has been a few years ago, who's up in the northeast part of the state. And he was at the end of my presentation, I was talking about precision conservation and thinking about ways we can strategically target conservation practices so we can maximize the overall profitability of their fields. And as I was walking out of the room, he stopped me and he said, one of the things that stuck out, and I had one of the slides I had in there was about prairie strips that Iowa State started over there and putting those into fields. And he said some of the data that they were showing and I presented there was basically a 20 times increase in soil retention by putting those prairie strips into those fields. And he mentioned about his fields and how he had been losing topsoil on them. And he said, I am thinking now, you mentioned the word stewardship, I'm thinking about the stewardship of that land for my kids and my grandkids. Because he said, I think he was close to like mid-70s. And he said, I'm thinking about the longevity of our operation. And he said, if that's all I got to do, simple things like that, why not? He said, I'm thinking about that longevity of our operation well beyond when I'm gone. And my grandkids will be operating this at some point. So that's a really powerful point that you made.
So it's on our farm in Saline County, we have some hilly ground, and I've estimated 15, 18 inches of topsoil lost. So we're farming the bee horizon, and it's a tough soil. And,
Wow.
and it's because we moldboard plowed every year when I was a kid. And like I said, I was convinced you had to do tillage until I got converted in 92. So
Sure.
Yeah. And what was it because you saw that you were losing soil to erosion, or why did you decide to go to a no-till system?
Well, I'd been hearing about what Dwayne Beck at South Dakota State, the Dakota Lakes Research Farm, was preaching about no-till farming and all those things, and I just couldn't believe it. But then I met a farmer at Ideal, South Dakota, that he said, "Ray, we can't hardly afford to grow wheat." When I was at South Dakota State in the '60s, it was all wheat summer fallow, and this is '92, and he said, "And they grow a crop every year." And what the heck is going on? And then there's no-till, and had all this rotation crops and something growing every year. And it convinced me that I was on the wrong side. And so our farm has been no-tilled since '94. And you can really see, now I can really see the positive stuff on what's going on.
Yeah. Well, that's really cool. I know a property I deer hunt at here just outside of Lincoln. The neighbor, he's been doing no-till for years, and that's I made a joke to the landowner one day. I said, I see more deer activity in that field that's been under no-till versus some of the neighboring ones that are not. And he said, well, it's just he's been doing that for years. I'm not implying that that's necessarily going to bring more deer in, but it was interesting to see more activity in that area, and just because he was also doing a lot of cover crops as well, right, following harvest. And so he's constantly thinking about the retention of that soil because, obviously that's thinking about profitability. And I think that's been an interesting thing since I've been here at the university to see, and I'm sure you thinking about over the years, the decades of change, it's been kind of an increased adoption rate of no-till practices. There's obviously folks that still don't, but it's interesting to see that, and then starting to see the impacts that it's having in the soil retention of their operations.
And I make the comment to guys that 42 years ago when we moved to Kearney, you could drive down the interstate in the fall and everything was black. And now you hardly see. There's a couple of fields I saw today, a disc already, and what the heck is going on? But most of it's not. And so the farmers in Nebraska have adopted no-till, I think, much better than maybe some of the other states. And so we're on the right track.
That's good.
So historically, when erosion was bringing us our soils, whether it be through wind and water, what was causing that soil to be broken loose historically? Because obviously people probably weren't plowing hundreds, thousands, millions of years ago.
So the glacier, when the glacier melted, of course, the glacier, you don't have anything growing, so everything's bare. And as that said, melting, then there's probably nothing growing. And the wind part, I don't understand how strong the winds had to be, but they had to be a lot different situation than what we have today. But it's so far my imagination. But the other one, the parent material, you talk about the alluvial stuff, and you think about Platte River flowing down through the middle of Nebraska and how wide that valley is. That was the floodplain at one time.
Yeah. How
damn much water, so to speak, was coming down
that's incredible.
That river to do that.
Yeah, we've really channelized it than what it was historically. I mean, it was miles wide.
In places anyway,
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely.
Yeah, one of those interesting things I told you about the sand hills being active dunes.
Yeah.
And the geologist out at North Platte with UNL told us one time out at Big Springs, you go up the hill and there's a gravel pit up there on the hill. Same rocks as in the gravel pits down in the river.
Oh, really?
In the water. From the Rocky Mountains. And the sand hills dammed up the Platte River and it went across the sand hills. And that was the rocks were up there. Because that was, so it's just that those kind of stories really intrigue me, but I don't know very much about it. But it's just fun to hear about some of those things.
Oh, that's incredible.
So did Nebraska historically look, say, like the sand hills? Was it sand hills all across Nebraska before other parent material was deposited here?
I don't think so. and I don't understand. Never could understand where the sand come from for sure, because you're talking about at one time Nebraska was underwater, and those kind of things, and how that got deposited there and nowhere else. I just don't know that stuff. But
So you mentioned that historically Nebraska and portions of the Great Plains were underwater. Where did that water go, and what caused it to move?
the geology of some of that stuff in the plate tectonics, the plates are moving all the time, and when the plates are moving against each other, and that's what caused the Rocky Mountains to form, and the other kind of things. And again, I don't understand very much about that, but at one time, if you look at the east coast of United States and the west coast of Africa, and there you can see that was all together and it broke apart, and so those things have floated that far apart.
That's incredible.
And then the Rocky Mountains are crashing and pushing us up. So, and then the other interesting one to me is that in South Dakota, the Black Hills, the magma pushed up, bent all those layers of bedrock up, so you could see that. And in the valley where the interstate is from Rapid City to Sturgis, there's red soil in there. It's the same red soil that's in Oklahoma.
Oh, really?
And it's the same formation. And it's those are the intriguing things, that there's all laid down, but then the plates move and it causes elevation to change. And
That's really interesting. Well, and I think those are the fascinating historical things I think sometimes we don't really think about, and kind of going back to the past and think about how those changes occurred over time, because we're obviously kind of in the here and now, and we're thinking about where we're at the moment. But it's really important, and thinking about that longevity and kind of looking at how those formations have occurred and why certain areas. Because I was going to ask you a question, kind of a follow up to that is, you look at Nebraska and you obviously have certain portions of the state that are very productive soils, and then other areas that are not. And you look at like soil rental rates for conservation programs that may be less out in, say, the McCook area, Trenton area, versus somewhere maybe here in the eastern portion of the state. And so obviously, there are differences there that are driving that, and I don't know if you could maybe speak to some of that diversity that you have in the land.
Yeah, there's number one is rainfall.
Sure.
The Exarban soil and the Hastings soil and the Holdridge soil and the Keith soil are all loess-derived. Our parent materials are loess, and the easy way to see the differences is to see where the lime zone is in that root zone, which Exarban would be probably 4 or 5 feet deep, maybe deeper than that even. The Hastings is going to be 3 to 4 feet. The Holdridge 3 feet, and the Keith 2 feet. And it's just because there's less rainfall.
Oh,
and the calcium moves down so far based on the amount of water you have, and then the carbonates, the CO2 precipitates it as calcium carbonate.
Interesting.
And the magnesium, we have magnesium in our soils, but it does not. Normally, the lime zone is mainly calcium. The magnesium is more in the B horizon. That doesn't leach as deep as calcium.
That's interesting.
And you can see the calcium zone just because it's a white line or band through your soils.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
If you have that profile.
That profile, yes. Yeah.
So you briefly mentioned glaciers and a little bit of their impact on the soils that we have in Nebraska today. So a glacier is just a mountain of ice, right? And it's moving, just grinding rocks and creating soil.
It's an ice, and what the professor at South Dakota State said, that is about a half mile thick in ice. And with that much weight, then the ice, it flows. And that's what causes it to move, is just the weight from all keep putting snow on top. And so then that grinds the soil that goes along there. Now, in my farm, and I have a canyon in our native grass pasture, and I can identify 3 different glacial periods in that canyon. I have the igneous rocks from up in Minnesota, and then there's a layer of high sodium material, and there's great big lime concretions in it. And then on top is pink rocks from the quartzite Sioux Falls, South Dakota area. And so the glaciers gouge those things out and move them, and then as the ice melted, then it just drops this stuff out. And of course, then the melting ice then forms all the streams and all the erosion and all those things too. But
So were they net positive for our soils, or did they hinder our soils? Because when I hear people talk about glaciers, I hear about a lot of rocky material that they spit out that maybe wasn't crushed or ground into parent material.
The glacial till soils have rocks in them, and the better soils, and like in South Dakota, the state soil is a glacial soil, very productive, and because it's all fine material. And then you got the ones with the big rocks in them, and those are the soils that brought the kids to college because they got tired of picking rocks. And then in Nebraska, I got an interesting story to tell about that. In University of Nebraska, calibrated the soil test on an 8-inch deep soil, and it's all we call it the plow zone. And Nebraskans could plow deeper because they had no rocks in their soil. And you go to other states, they got rocks, either bedrock or glacial rocks or something. And I always thought that was interesting. And when we moved up to farm at Western in '49, there's 2 fields that had rock in them, and Dad fenced that off and put it back to pasture.
Huh.
He hated rocks.
Yep.
So yeah, we were spoiled. We're spoiled in Nebraska for some of these things.
Yeah, and I mean, we
good.
really don't start finding rocks until you get down in southern Nebraska, right? Or maybe the southeast portion of the state.
No, the rocks would be all the way wherever there's glaciated areas. There'll be rocks, and they're not exposed as much in some areas. But like in our case, we have a native grass pasture that stayed that way because it's very hilly. But the glacier kind of pushed stuff up this way. It's called the Ann Moraine, and there's great big rocks in it, and then we have the igneous rocks, and we have the quartzite or the well, I don't want to say the pink rocks, the quartzite and igneous rocks, as separate there, but it's just interesting to see how that mixed up and stuff too.
That's interesting. So I'm going to jump to a slightly different topic, but you mentioned jumping back to no-till. So has that been kind of a transition for you mentioned a lot of producers starting to adopt more of that here in Nebraska and kind of seem to be more of the early adopters. Do you feel nationwide there's more growth in that realm of no-till? That people are, and obviously soils vary across the whole nation, but just thinking about the, sustainability of their operations and kind of the sustainability of those soils long term, is that kind of a growing endeavor?
It's growing, and the no-till farmer puts out a kind of an inventory every year of the increases in different states and those kind of things. So,
that's cool.
So and of course NRCS keeps up on some of that too. It's hard for me to understand why you wouldn't do it, but so it's interesting to me that. But the ag industry keeps producing all the equipment to do tillage.
To do it, yeah.
So it's you think about the battle that the farmer has, and the one time that we're talking about something, and somebody else is talking about something else, and there's a lot of decisions being made. And, and I think. The good part is that long term the no-tiller is really paying off on the dry land, and I think it would on here because you cut down on the amount of irrigation water you need. Number 2, and all the things that we talk about in erosion and soil, the number 1 factor is the raindrop. If you can protect the soil from the raindrop, you'll have a lot better water intake. But you get crops to come up, all those things. But if you got the raindrop pounding on the soil, separating the sand, silt, and clay, and sealing, and then you get that crust. Yeah. In the olden days, we had to go break the crust every time we got a hard rain. The rotary hose and the drag harrows we had to pull out in the fields. And now with the residue there, then the raindrop is protecting the soil. So water goes in. And the no-till, a lot of people give the credit to higher organic matter, water holding capacity. But the real water holding capacity is water intake. You get more water going in and less running off.
Yeah.
And it goes back to when we had this no-till in the plains meetings in Salina, and Dwayne Beck would say, stop treating the symptom and treat the problem. And then the symptoms were we had terraces and grass waterways to stop the runoff. The reason we had runoff is because we had bare soil, and the raindrops separated sand, silt, and clay.
I like that analogy.
I can ramble so much, but
hey, that's okay.
The farmer down in Halstead, Kansas, one time said something made me realize. So the largest clay particle is 2 microns in diameter. And nobody knows what the hell that is. But so you put 5,000 of those edge to edge, and you have 1 centimeter, or 3/8 of an inch. You make a square out of that. It's 5,000 times 5,000 is 25 million. And you build that up to 3/8 of an inch cube. You have 5,000 times 25 million is 125 billion clay particles in that little tiny cube. And that's why the clay, any clay in the soil is going to seal that. Now, in sandy soils, the water will still go in. But in any silt loam soil or loam soil, you'll get sealing, and if you don't protect the soil from the raindrop.
Yeah, it's kind of a funny story on clay. My neighbor had to put in some fence posts, and he said he was out there with the post hole digger, and he said I had to get 4 guys on it because there's so much clay in that soil. Trying to get the auger back out of the ground. So,
yeah. So you briefly mentioned that climate is very important for productive soils. Is that because in an area that rains more, it wears on that parent material more, creating more productive soils? Or is it because that climate's allowing plants to grow, which then benefits the soil?
So my simple answer would be, in Nebraska, our clays are 2-to-1 clays, mainly. What I learned is montmorillonite clays. They have a layer of silica, a layer of aluminum, layer of silica. You go down to southeast in Georgia, Alabama, 1 layer of silica is weathered off. You have a layer of aluminum, a layer of silica. You go to Brazil, now in Georgia, it's hotter and rains more. And you go to Brazil, it rains more and it's hot year-round. And there's no aluminum left. No silica left. It's all aluminum hydroxide. Is their clays, and down there they have to use silica as a fertilizer sometimes because there's no silica in the soil. And it's just interesting that when you ask about the soil in Nebraska, soils are young anyway, and then we've got all this other advantages, and we don't have the rainfall, and it gets cold in the wintertime. And so our soils will stay for a longer time.
And so you mentioned that our soils are young, and we're able to say that because
of the parent material's less.
Okay. And then we can look at that clay particle and see that the silica's not worn off.
Right.
Okay. Interesting.
That's interesting.
Worn off is weathered off, I guess would be a better way to say it.
Yeah. That's really fascinating.
And so we covered glaciers, we talked about climate, wind and water erosion. How has volcanic activity affected our soils?
Well, I don't know if it has at all in our soils here. Of course, the elevation and all that stuff we talked about, volcanoes may have had something to do with Nebraska rising, but the 12 million years ago when the rhinoceros were here, and they got that dig up at Royal, and there was a big volcanic explosion from Yellowstone, and then the geologist said that good news was that Yellowstone explodes every 600,000 years. The bad news is last time it exploded was 600,000 years ago. So I'm always interested in want to hear about earthquakes in Yellowstone. When's it going to blow? And then up there there's a chalk mine. Go over to Loop City and down that highway. I can't remember the town there, but there's a historical thing where that called a chalk mine. That's volcanic ash in there. So volcanic ash is probably mixed in a lot of our loess, and it probably got minerals in it just like anything else. And
okay.
So
So the chalk that they're pulling out of this chalk mine was actually volcanic ash
Yes.
that was just compressed.
Really?
They called it chalk, but it was actually volcanic ash.
Very interesting.
That's really interesting. That's why I love these episodes. I learn so much things I don't know.
Are there any other processes that we didn't think of that you think are really important to the soils that we have in Nebraska today?
Well, the chemistry, somewhat. Some of the things that I think about a little bit is nitrogen and sulfur fertilizer are acidifying, and they cause us to have to put lime on once in a while, and for taking care of the soil that way. 1 pound of nitrogen neutralizes 1.8 pounds of lime, and 1 pound of sulfur neutralizes 3.6 pounds of lime. So over time, and then the irrigation farmers are saying, well, my dryland corners are getting low pH, and my irrigated isn't. Well, our irrigation water, you ever heard of hard water? That's calcium carbonate. And so our irrigated land, the pHs are alkaline, and are neutral to alkaline, except when you irrigate out of the calamus up there, so some of that water is so low in minerals that they're actually having put lime on some of those fields up there. But
Yeah.
Another thing is that we cannot test productivity, and I'm fearful that sometimes farmers try to think they can get the same yield on all parts of the field because of just putting fertilizer on or water or whatever, and some soils will not produce as well, and NRCS has those rated pretty well in the old soil surveys and some of the soil mapping now that has that rated there, but people need to understand that part. And one time, when I was at Dodge City, a farmer called me and said, your soil tests are no good. He said, where I can really grow a good crop, you say I need a lot of fertilizer, and where I can't grow anything, I don't need fertilizer. I said, well, yeah, your bad soil is not producing anything, so it's not removing any. And so the good soil is taking a lot of nutrients off, so you have to put fertilizer back on there. And it's kind of that simple to understand.
That's good. That's a good point, because one of the things I always advocate for folks is to do soil tests. And one of the things when I was down in Georgia, I worked for the University of Georgia Deer Research Lab, and one of the things that is pretty popular down in the South is food plots. And so folks would go out and putting food plots out in preparation for fall hunting season. And we went to a hunting club that I was part of, and the folks that have been leasing it for a number of years are like, we never can grow anything here. And of course, down there, it's a lot of pine trees. So typically right there is a signal it's probably going to be somewhat more acidic than what you see maybe here in Nebraska. But then, so we did that soil test on a number of plots, and it was coming back around like 5.1 to 5.2 in pH. And I said, well, right there is part of your problem. I said, you just can't just throw down seed and expect it to grow. If you're not putting anything with it and addressing this issue here, you have major, problem with acidic soils, and you got to be able to address that with lime. And so hence we did that, and then they started seeing productive plots because of just doing a simple soil test, which wasn't a big cost to them.
So when we do soil tests for food plots, then I tell the farmers that call and ask questions, all you have to do is put the fertilizer on once and maybe repeat it in 3 or 4 years. But if you're leaving it there and you're just replanting, you're not removing anything other than what the deer might be taking, then you don't need fertilizer. But like the pH and correcting those things, you got to do. But people understand that part. When you take stuff off the land is when you need to put fertilizer back on.
That makes sense.
And I want to drill into more. You said that you got a soil test that it was a poor soil, so you told the landowner not to put any inputs into it. So he was frustrated with you.
Right.
I like that because that should be perennial habitat, it sounds to me, right?
Right.
So I like to hear you say that all soils aren't created equal, because those lower quality soils, that doesn't mean they're worthless by any means, but maybe they should be perennial habitat for livestock. And then really that's where our wildlife can thrive as well. So can you speak to that a little more?
Well, I guess it's obvious that whatever you want to produce, that you need to understand that that's all that soil is going to produce. And then if you're you got all the machinery costs and all that, then stop spending money.
Sure.
But the other thing is you don't need to put fertilizer on if you can't produce anything.
Sure.
And that in the grazing thing, understand that the animals redeposit probably 80 to 90% of the minerals back on the land, and so when you go into a grazing situation, you don't need to use near as much fertilizer as when you're haying and hauling stuff in. And when you hay it, then you got to haul the manure back.
Yep.
It'd be easier just to put the cows out there instead of doing all that extra work.
Well, that's kind of what I've always envisioned is this kind of holistic system where we are farming our best acres and we're conserving those marginal acres, and maybe those soils just are not very productive. And that conservation piece doesn't necessarily mean you are not, you're just leaving it go. It could be, you're putting cattle on that, or you're ultimately the goal I'm always looking at is how do you essentially maximize overall profitability, production of that system so that it actually is achieving what the landowners need, especially when you have a lot of unknowns going into farming as a whole, and then especially got taxes and other things you got to take care of. Can we think about ways that are, and like you mentioned, they're not all the same. So soils here in eastern Nebraska, that kind of cookie cutter approach doesn't really apply because they're going to be different in how you may treat some of that versus other soils in different portions of the state. And then you mentioned rainfall is another factor in there. That's what I always say, it's from a farming standpoint, is incredibly complex. There's a lot of things you got to think through and make those decisions. And you could have multiple fields in your own operation that have vastly different needs, which you're having to figure out, which again, hence goes back to having soil tests and really important.
Well, that's over time, you think about some of these things, and maybe we'll switch back sometime when you talk about some of these things. But my story is, I went to February. The second year I went to February. The first year I drove back and forth, so I was helping Dad milk the cows. And the second year, then a friend, he wanted me to go stay with him, and we went out for football and that kind of stuff. But when Dad and Mom come down to visit, and I said, Dad, how you get along milking? And he said, I just turned the calves in with the cows. So that's, the farmers, as we started fertilizing and growing bigger crops, then the interest in surviving become how to grow bigger crops instead of thinking of the holistic system. And if you had livestock and you put cover crop in as a cover crop for a year, and you rotated, or had rotational grazing in that, so you could plant different things at different times, and then grow your grain crops for 3 or 4 years, and then back to that, get that in the grazing system, and have those livestock moving each year to a different field. Then you got grass-fed beef you can market, all those things, and some of the guys are putting hogs and sheep in those same pastures.
Oh, really?
So just pay attention to some of that stuff come along.
Sure, yeah.
But
and I've had other producers that have talked to me about just they're curious about diversifying their operations and thinking about different ways beyond what they currently have been doing or been doing for the past couple of decades. Can we think about some alternative options for maybe some of those marginal acres? And I think that's an area we talk about in extension, and with my role as an extension specialist, is we need to develop more of those tools to help producers make those decisions of kind of like status quo versus alternative options, whether that's, rotational grazing options there, or it's thinking about hunting leases, or it's thinking just other opportunities that you can diversify your operation, knowing that not one is going to fit everybody. There's going to be a diversity of things that people can potentially, employ on their own land.
That, when you think about some of that, like the wildlife, in South Dakota, a lot of the farmers dedicate 20 or 25% of the land to no inputs, just planting the crop. So you don't have the pheasants are surviving, all those things, and so then that becomes part of their livelihood.
Sure.
And then some of them make more money off their hunting area than they do the rest of it.
Yeah, that's true.
And so I think that's another opportunity that some Nebraskans have to do some things. Because I think people are interested in that recreation.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. In your opinion, what is the perfect soil? And you can discuss this in a sand, silt, and clay combination. You can talk about it from a farming practices standpoint, but in your opinion, what's the perfect soil for crop production?
Well, it would be a silt loam soil, number one, and I'm thinking about like in our bottom land on our farm. It's silt loam all the way down. You can probe it no matter how dry it is, and so the topsoil is probably 12 to 15 inches, and the B horizon is probably another 18, 20 inches, and there's not much clay in it. It's a blocky structure, and then underneath that is the parent material, and so you got root zones of 8, 10 feet, all those kind of things, and we found corn roots down 7, 8 feet in some of the soil pits that we've been in.
Really?
With
Wow.
Paul Yass and I, and so that silt loam soil, that kind of thing that we're talking about, with it covered, so that the raindrops not pounding the topsoil.
Sure.
You think about all this stuff, and that's what I told you. I was in the Soil Museum in Netherlands, and going around looking at soil profiles from all over the world, and then come around the corner, and there was a Holdridge silt loam from Gosper County, Nebraska, and it made me realize that why our production's so good in Nebraska is because of the soils we have.
Huh.
And to describe it, it's pretty simple. It's not, to have that, but
Sure.
you got to have it covered.
And I think that's a perfect segue into the next portion. What are, and maybe there aren't any natural, or I guess major natural modern day geological processes going on. Maybe it's more just us causing erosion through cropping practices and not keeping the soil covered. But how are our soils changing today?
Good grief. If you take a native grass, they're probably not changing at all unless you're abusing the system. So soils, it changes very slowly. So everything that we see bad is because we caused it. It's not natural type things, and when if all the tillage, and you can't do that. We drive over the stuff all the time, so that's some compaction. So that Paul Yassett always is a proponent of wheel track management and stuff, but I never have paid attention to that because I like to take my pickup and drive around the fields. And when they're no-till, you don't have to worry about bumps and stuff.
Sure.
It's all pretty easy to drive and look at stuff.
So basically today, if your soils are changing for better or for worse, it's because of the cropping practices that you're implementing on them.
And like on our farm, I can really see after 30 years of no-till, I think our production it's kind of unbelievable. This year my wheat's made 73 bushel, and it sounds like the soybeans are making 70. And it's all dry land down southern Saline County. So in the wheat was like knee high. It wasn't very tall. So we're capturing all the water, so to speak. And the Swan Creek that goes through our farm was bone dry a year ago. Big old cracks in the riverbed, and this year it flowed at times, but a lot of time it wasn't flowing. There's a beaver dam by the bridge, and so you can see it. It wasn't working, it was. They just had a little bit of water in it. So we're still really dry,
Sure.
but we're getting these kind of crop yields, and it's amazing. And I've always said it ever since I was a little kid. It's Jefferson County and Saline County. It's always dry in the summertime. We do get a few years and get a lot of rain, but
Sure. I'm happy that we have a little more rain this year than we've had in the previous probably 3 or 4 years. Definitely been pretty dry, but still, as you noted, we're definitely still dry regardless. So, and I'm sure a lot of those dryland producers are pretty happy to see a little bit more increased water this year with some of the storms.
So that, the soil thing, when you ask about that, I have an old soil survey, but in 1889, the average corn yield in Saline County was 48 bushel. Reed's Yellow Dent was a variety of choice. And in
What year was that?
1889. 1889.
1889.
And I graduated high school in 1955, and average dryland corn yield in Saline County was 9 bushel.
Was 9 bushel.
9.
So
So that we broke the sod, and we got everything we could out of the organic matter, so to speak. And we're just about done. When I went to college and found out I could put nitrogen on and grow more corn.
Oh.
And that's kind of when we got hooked on that stuff.
And arguably, when you're breaking sod, that is going to be the highest quality soil at that point. Correct?
And my data, I got some data shows that in the first 10 years of breaking the sod, you lost 20% of the organic matter.
Okay.
Really?
And so if it started at 5 and you went down to 4% in 10 years, and that's 1,000 pounds of nitrogen in that organic matter. So the pioneers had 1,000 pounds of nitrogen or 100 pounds per year to start farming.
So is it safe to say that historically genetics were just lacking?
I'll say this, that the hybrids are invented or developed in the 30s. And so after World War II, most farmers were planting hybrid corn.
Okay.
And so in 1955, it was hybrid corn mainly. But the acreage of corn had dropped in half in that time frame also. We were growing milo because milo would grow better in the drought. Well, they're dry. It was dry. We got blamed the drought. But it's because we're doing tillage and because we weren't keeping the nutrients up. And now we get the same amount of rainfall. In fact, in 55, Swan Creek run all the time. And then the last 3 years, Swan Creek hasn't flowed, and we got, 3 years ago was 83 bushel of corn and I think 19 bushel of soybeans. Last year was 39 bushel of soybeans and 130 bushel of corn.
Really?
And this year, 70 bushel of soybeans. So I don't know what the corn is yet.
Sure, yeah. Wow.
So it's interesting when you start saying, what do you see? By the way, I told a farmer down at Osage City, Kansas, I think I'm building soil at the top because of no-till. And he said, well, Darwin figured that out. And he sent me a paper for Darwin in 1871. And Darwin said, artifacts sink in the soil because worms bring soil up to the top. And when we're doing it, and you go in no-till, and if you got the group, and I pull this trash out and show them all the worm castings on that. And so, we got worms when you do no-till, and the worms are bringing the soil up there. So on my farm, I can see about 1.5 to 2 inches of new soil on top of that. So we're growing soil.
And how long is it taking you to put that inch
30 years.
30 years.
And what I really want to do sometime, get time, is go down and take a really thin slice and look, because I think you could probably see layers of carbon each year.
Oh, sure.
And you could actually age the soil a little bit. I was in Ireland last year, and the peat that they burn, they harvest this stuff, and it builds, was it 2 inches per 100 years of, and as they cut, we stopped the bus, and I got out and took a picture, and you can actually see the layers of organic material each year putting down.
And that was in what?
It was in Ireland in the peat bogs.
The peat bogs.
Yeah, they're in the pioneers before all the normal stuff now, but they burned peat as heating and for cooking. Now they do it mainly for cooking, but they're still. And the other interesting part of that was that the peat bogs up on the slopes, not in the bottom.
Oh.
So it's so cold and wet there that the organic matter never completely decomposes, and so it builds up over time.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's some really interesting things. Yeah. So as thinking about kind of the long-term sustainability of our operations here, are there things that, you feel, producers beyond no-till that they can be doing to help think about soil productivity and ways they can ensure that long-term sustainability of their operations? Kind of going back to one of my earlier points about that producer in Northeast Nebraska, ways that they can help ensure that longevity. Because obviously I think that's what we all want at the end of the day. We want to ensure we can feed and fuel the world. So what are other proactive steps they can be doing?
So mine is, number one, keep the ground covered.
Okay.
if you do that, and then if you'll diversify your cropping, and it has to be 3. It'd be better to have more than that, and then you can reduce your inputs, and then the pesticides are going to be different each year for different crops. So you get away from maybe pest resistance and all those kind of things. And then maybe the other one would be if we can find companion crops or crops that compete with the weeds.
Sure.
We know that rye does a good job of knocking weeds down. Well, what other crops could we have a crop in a rotation that puts weeds down, but it's a good cash crop for us.
Yeah.
And all those kind of explorations. And I talked to Dwayne Beck about, his wife is Canadian, and said, why do Canada farmers have so many different crops? My wife and I were in a field up at Lethbridge, and he had 11 different crops growing.
Really? Wow.
And Dwayne said, what was a government program? And what did the government do? They said, well, when the wheat price went to heck in the 50s, the Canadian Wheat Board said, this is all the wheat you're going to produce, this many bushels. And so then as the yields went up, they had more and more land available for other crops.
Oh,
and so what did the United States do? In my example, one year I had 60 bushel wheat, and then I got $1 a bushel LDP. And the guy that got 30 bushel wheat, what did he get? He got $30 an acre. Well, I got 60. So the U.S. program is to pay the farmer to get the highest yields possible.
Oh, sure.
And then protect, in the case here in Nebraska, corn and soybeans. Yeah. Get a lot better protection than anything else.
Sure.
And so what's Canada doing differently? Can you explain that a little more for me?
The production, you got so many bushels of wheat you can produce.
Uh-huh.
And then when the wheat yields went up, then they couldn't sell that wheat, so they had to find other things to plant.
So they were subsidizing crop diversity?
I guess they didn't know it, but that's what they're doing.
Okay. And then we seem to just really focus on corn and soybeans specifically, as opposed to
peanuts and cotton down south,
opposed to higher diversity here in the U.S.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've always wondered that because just thinking about how do we diversify our operations and how do we diversify that crop rotation. And, obviously markets play into that, and it's kind of like the collective system. But it's, like I said, I've talked to producers here, and I'm sure you have as well, that are interested in, diversifying their operations and thinking about what are some different things I could actually do on my property to hopefully maximize every acre to, and thinking about from the stewardship standpoint, not just from the economic, but from the stewardship and the sustainability, and thinking about, I can put in, some prairie strips, or I can put in, some of those marginal acres into something different. And I think that's the exciting thing. I'm trying to think about how do you kind of, best incentivize and kind of encourage that.
The simplest one is cover crops for grazing.
Sure.
If you're going to do a specialty crop, now you got to become a marketer.
Sure.
You got to get out there and find out where the market is, and then see if they want it.
Yeah.
Venango is a guy. He goes out to California to some kind of a grocery marketing thing and finds out what they're looking for, and then he comes back and produces it for them.
Hopefully he's not mad at you giving away his secrets.
But
that's a good point, though, because I've heard similar things like, well, is there really a market for that, and how am I going to do that? It's just, I joke and use like the Staples easy button. It's easier just to keep doing what you've been doing. That's just the reality of it.
And that the older guys, they've always taken to the elevator.
Sure.
Well, in my example now in soybeans in Kearney, they called and said, we're not going to go to the elevator that the corn goes to because they don't take soybeans.
Oh.
Or they don't want them. The price is 30 cents higher at the other place. Want to know if it'd be okay if they sent them over there. And I said, sure. So you got those kind of problems too, but the young people should be able to learn the marketing things, and because my vision would be to restore rural agriculture is to find families that would produce some concept, maybe a cannery that would be canning some kind of vegetables, and then you'd have some of them that would be doing the farming, and some doing the canning, and some doing the marketing.
Yeah.
And you do this all online type stuff, and
Yep.
and of course then that makes the food price higher. So maybe then people, because the government wants that cheap food, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But there's so much stuff that if you had some, and I think some young people are more interested in food production now than they ever have been.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think there'll be some. I know there's some movement because
Sure.
there's a restaurant in Kearney that they advertise this product is produced locally, and this
Sure.
is produced locally. And so as the restaurants start doing more of that stuff too,
Absolutely.
that helps the small young farmers. Now, how do you get a landlord or a landowner to say, yeah, I'll be willing to support you,
Yeah.
kind of thing? Then.
Well, I've heard of that. Like, I guess a little side note of that is that, from a conservation standpoint, with what is like approximately 40-some% of our lands are leased here in Nebraska, that the conversation piece of, well, if I'm a landowner, and I can tell you this from personally, we did a survey, what was that, 3 years ago, where we sent a mailer out to 7,500 landowners across the state of Nebraska, and we had mailers going to folks that lived in New York City and California and Georgia and all over the place. And I'm sure there's a number of them that were family owned, and that's just the kids that now have lived in a different state. But the point is then that creates an additional barrier, because now it's the person who's that tenant leasing that out, they may or may not want to have that conversation with that landowner about certain practices and diversifying, because it's like, well, how is that going to impact the bottom line? And am I going to get a similar amount of money off of this? And so, and that just, it's just an additional challenge that we have to kind of recognize and figure out kind of workarounds to that.
So, the challenge is, how do you convince the landowners that this is proper?
Sure, that's true.
All the stuff we're talking about.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I always forget that part of it until you get down to how you're going to convince farmers. Then it's the land. In my case, I'm the landowner, and I'm telling the tenant what to do, kind of thing. And then I'm on a 50-50 lease, so I know what the costs are. And I'm trying to help. That's how I try to make decisions for other people.
Yeah.
Knowing some of those things.
That's right. One thing I did want to ask you, you mentioned the younger individuals. Have you seen an increased trend with the precision ag adoption here in Nebraska of people thinking about like the soil moisture meters, just one illustration, and just other technologies that could, think about sustainability of their operations and particularly the soils by this new technology that's being generated out? Because I know there's obviously classes here at UNL that teach a lot of precision ag related efforts. So
I guess I'd be surprised if it'd be at least, I think 50% of the people are in those things. Because they're always talking about moisture meters, and then you hear about guys that they're running their pivots with their phone and all that stuff. So now you got drones, young guys, drones out. So what percentage it is, I think in the center part of Nebraska where we are, I think there's a lot of adoption of things.
Yeah.
And maybe over here on the interstate, I see quite a bit of no-till adoption. So I think it's working in this area too. But.
From a soil sampling standpoint, and maybe fertilizer application, do you feel like folks are taking more soil samples than they are historically? Say more per field to get a smaller grid, or what are your thoughts there?
The grid sampling is expanded quite a bit. I don't know how it's going to be this year. And my experience, that when commodity prices are low, soil sampling is down, and it's just opposite what you think it should be.
Sure.
They need to, and I don't know, the fertilizer prices are high, crop prices low, so we really got to manage it carefully. And one of the things that I haven't mentioned that I'm concerned about, nitrate still going up in our groundwater.
Sure.
We just got to really manage nitrogen carefully, and I worry about that some.
Yeah.
And I worry about my recommendations that it's too high and stuff, but.
Yeah,
there are guys that are very successful at growing like for half a pound of nitrogen per bushel for 300 bushel corn's 150 pounds of nitrogen, and we'd probably be recommended probably 220 or 230 in our soil tests, but we got to keep them, keep that down, and then put the nitrogen on. That's that chore thing we talked about with the cows, but I tell farmers that it's time to start doing chores. Feed the crop when the crop needs to be fed, not when you want to do it.
Sure, yeah.
Because the cows, you have to feed them, and maybe that's why they got rid of them, because you had to do it every day, type of thing.
Yeah. Well, we've had a few episodes on nitrates here, and that's been really, for me, very engaging. I've learned a lot, and I know that's a big challenge here, and it's really a challenge across not only the nation but even the world as well. One of the things we learned from our most recent speaker, Dr. Jesse Bell, and that's a thing. I know there's a lot of folks here in Nebraska that are actively working on that and how to try to best manage that. Folks can tune into those episodes to learn more about the nitrate issues going on.
So as we look to wrap this episode up, Ray, obviously you're a pretty wise individual. You've been around the world looking at soils, crop production. Do you have any words of advice for the younger generation of farmers coming up, the current generation of farmers? It can be soils, it can be keeping your soils productive. What are some words of advice that you have?
Well, my words of advice is, if you're going to be farming, number one, keep the ground covered. Number two, diversify your cropping. If you don't do those two things, don't come to me complaining. I guess is what I said. And then of course, use all the science to manage the input costs, because that's an important part of it. But
I like the don't come to me complaining if you're not going to practice soil health.
In the soil health, we can measure some of the stuff to see if you're doing good. But if you can't see it, if you can't see the ground covered, don't come complaining about things.
Yeah.
And if anybody listening wanted to look into kind of soil sampling or different soil health topics, where could they go for more information?
We have Ward Labs, www.wardlab.com. You have all that stuff in there. And on the resources, you can click on resources and get the Ward Guide. And we have about 200 pages of stuff written up on soils and plant testing and feeds and in soil health and in fertilizer recommendations.
That's great.
All kinds of things. So I think it's a pretty good resource. And then there's always, probably in my case, phone is better than email, but you can call, and we got people who can answer questions. At Ward Laboratories, we got 4 PhDs on staff.
Oh, wow.
So I think we can get pretty good science out.
That's great. Yeah.
Sounds like it.
Well, and I was going to add to that. You mentioned earlier in the conversation, in your introduction, about extension and being that role too, and you were in that role at one point in Oklahoma, and that's just one of those places you mentioned, just having a lot of resources that people can really understand, kind of just even some of the maybe basic questions that they may have. That there's a lot of information out there for folks to be able to find, whether it be through UNL Extension or other outlets, to help them decide on, okay, should I do this or that, or what does this mean, if I see this in a soil test? Because I think that's sometimes you may not necessarily know what to do, and there's a lot of resources out there.
Well, I think the one thing I found out, that I was in the university system for 16 years, then went to Dodge City, and the farmers were a lot more open with me asking questions when I was private than I was at the university. And I guess don't feel intimidated to ask a university person a question, because they need to know those questions. And a lot of my practical stuff I've learned is because of farmers.
Sure.
And it's one of those jokes I have, is people think I'm smart. It's because I have to answer their dumb questions. And I have to, in the early days, it's go get the books and read some stuff and then get back to them.
Yeah.
Now I got most of those things down.
And that's and that's a really good point you mentioned, even with the connection with the farmers, because that's honestly, I learned so much from just talking to producers out there, because they're the ones that are obviously living on the land and they've seen this stuff, especially ones that have been there for generations. operations. And it's just really insightful to have those conversations of, how some of the, and then again, there's obviously always new questions coming out. But like you said, now today, if you had your phone, you could literally just get on there and find an answer within seconds compared to the old days. But where are you getting your information from? Right. I would argue is your bigger thing. You can find information, but is it from an actual trustworthy source or not? That's a whole nother conversation.
And that's my take on it is I tell farmers that they're very good at observing, but pretty poor at drawing conclusions. And that's where the extension people can come in and help them understand. But at the same time, I've learned over time that if a guy asks me a question, I ask a lot more questions before I give him an answer. Because you got to find the situation that they're in. And, one example, the guy from Burwell called, and he had high nitrate. So then he cut his forage, cut the fertilizer rate in half. He had high nitrate. Then he didn't put any fertilizer on, still had high nitrate. And he called me and said, "What's going on?" "Well, what's the field?" "It's a 20-acre field." And okay, what else do you do there? "Well, I winter my cows on it." "Okay, how many months? How many cows?" And it's 300 and some. "And you feed them there?" "Yeah." And so I said, "How much do they eat and protein?" And I calculated it's about over 200 pounds of nitrogen they're bringing in each year to feed the cows.
Yeah.
And that kind of, that understanding of those things is kind of difficult, I guess, to me. If you didn't understand, you didn't ask enough questions, then you wouldn't even know that.
That's true.
So context is important.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah,
absolutely. So with that, I think I just want to say thanks, Dr. Ward, for taking the time to come to Lincoln from Kearney and talking with us today. I know I learned quite a bit, and I'm sure our listeners will as well.
Well, I hope so. I can't imagine listeners sitting and listening that long.
Well, they might break it up over a couple of different listens. I know that's what I do. I ended up I like listening to podcasts. One of the things I really enjoy about podcasts is just the educational piece. Because today, and that's where extension, we're really trying to change the game in that. Historically, we had kind of like our NEB guides here in Nebraska, and we still do those, but also diversifying, having other sources, because you got folks right now, especially in combines or driving or grain carts, and they can sit and listen to something and be like, "Huh, I didn't know that," and kind of learn.
All they have to do is be there to turn around, I guess.
That's true. Yeah, that is true. Yep, times have changed.
Awesome. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks again.